Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Shut Up and Read. Today I'll be doing the books that I read for the month of April, so let's just get right into it. So this will definitely be the first time where I'll be providing some more detailed stats. No one has actually asked me specifically for some of these stats, but a lot of people have commented on my past videos asking me how I read so many books. So I'm hoping that providing some of these statistics, it will help you understand a little bit in terms of how I read so many books. So the first stats obviously would be how many books I read for the month of April, and that is 19 books, which honestly is not the greatest, but that's only because I have been reading 25 plus books for the past few months, and so for me to jump down to under 20 is kind of a bummer, I guess. But to be honest though, before jumping that high with my stats with reading, it used to be between 15 to 20, so I'm still relatively in my average range here. But 19 books compared to like the 28, the 33 books that I've read in the past few months is just very low. For me at least. So out of the 19 books that I read, one of them was 1 star. 5 of the books were 3-star books. 7 of them were 4-star books. 4 of them were 5-star books. And then there are 2 that I technically didn't give any stars, and I'll explain that later on in the video because I'll be discussing those books specifically. Now on to the stats that I think is actually important in terms of how I read so many books per month, and that is the format of how I read these books. So out of the 19 books that I read, 4 of them were ebooks, 7 of them were audiobooks, and 3 out of the 7, I also read half of them with ebooks as well. And the last 8 books that I read were physical copies. So you can definitely tell from the stats there that my physical and my audiobooks are definitely the number 2 reasons why my number of books that I read per month are pretty high, because I just fly through them really quickly. Ebooks are just definitely my lowest in terms of me just getting through them fast and whatnot. But anyways, moving on to the books that I want to discuss for this video. So there are 5 books that I want to discuss. 2 of them are series, so there's definitely more books in there that I want to discuss as well. The first book that I want to discuss is Romanoff by Nadine Brands. This one I received from the publisher, and this one comes out on May 7th, so I think by the time this video comes out, it would have been out already. So this book is a reimagining / retelling of Anastasia with some magical elements to it. And the book already starts off with Anastasia and her family captured and imprisoned by the Bolshevik army. And the only way to save her family right now is to activate this ancient spell or somehow enlist the help of this Bolshevik soldier who might not hate them as much as he indicated. Unfortunately though, everything goes sideways when she and her family finds herself at the end of a firing squad, and that particular soldier at the other end pointing a gun at her. So for this book, I gave it 3 stars. So for a long time now, I've always been fascinated with the Anastasia and the Romanoffs and all that history, but at the same time, I never really did any intensive research on it. And one of the main issues that I have with this book was the fact that I felt that the author wrote this book with the assumption that the reader already has some knowledge, like some detailed knowledge about the Bolsheviks, about the White Army, as well as the Russian language. There were a lot of times when the author would use Russian to describe something or to utilize it for whatever reason, and there was no English translation of it. And as a reader who has zero knowledge of Russian and that language, it was very hard for me to understand and grasp the context of what exactly the author is trying to portray in this particular scene. So the meanings for those words were definitely lost on me, and I definitely found myself a bit confused at times. And it didn't help that I didn't really know much history in terms of the White Armies, the Bolsheviks, what exactly was the history of the Romanoffs, etc., and why exactly are these 2 armies competing against each other, and what exactly is the Romanoffs, like their role in this whole thing. Like, I didn't really know too much about that going in, and so with me not understanding the Russian language that much, as well as me not knowing the full detail of the history of the Romanovs, like the actual history, it was very hard for me to understand and comprehend some of the things that were being displayed and portrayed in this book. And then the other issue that I had with this book was the pacing. It was just incredibly slow in the first half of this book, and it didn't really pick up until the second half when things started to come together and there's a lot more action and I became more invested in the story. That being said though, I did really enjoy the family dynamic within the Romanoff, as well as the love and kindness that they showed towards their captives despite being in that situation. But the ironic thing though was when I was reading some of the reviews after I had finished this book, a lot of people actually didn't like that because it was very unrealistic in terms of how they were actually like in real life. But for me, as a fictional standpoint and as someone who didn't really know much knowledge going in of the history, it was fine. I liked that. But for those who did go in with knowledge, they didn't like that. So it was kind of ironic in the sense that me not knowing the history worked out for me in this particular aspect. Then in terms of the magical element, I actually did really like the magical element portrayed in this book because it was incredibly unique and it was not like anything that I've ever read before. So I did really like that. So overall, I did enjoy this book. There are definitely some pros and cons to some of the aspects in this book, but I think ultimately I did enjoy it, just not to the extent that I would have liked. The next few books that I want to discuss are the Raven Cycle series by Maggie Stiffwater. So this is a magical realism series that follows Blue and the Raven Boys on this epic quest to find and awake this old Welsh king. And the series just deals with prophecy, magic, fate, destiny, and of course romance. So overall, I did give the series 3 stars, and I actually did an entire reading vlog on it documenting my experience while reading the entire series. So I'll link that above in case you want to check that out. So because I did that vlog, I'm not going to go too much into details in terms of my thoughts about this book because literally there's an entire video about that. But basically the first 2 books were absolutely my favorite. I love those first 2 books. The third one I think suffered second book syndrome where it was just very slow and it's kind of a filler novel. And the last book was just kind of the same, but the ending was just very disappointing just because it was not what I expected. The writing was also very lyrical and very flowy, and sometimes it worked incredibly well, but at the same time there were other times when it didn't work so well and I just found myself very confused and having to reread pages again. My favorite part though were definitely the characters. I absolutely loved the dynamic and the relationship between Blue and the Raven Boys. It was incredibly endearing for me to find out how that friendship grew, and my favorite characters were definitely Ronan and Gansey. I just love those two so much. They were just very relatable for me, at least. Even the secondary characters were really well done. I really like Mr. Grammy. He was the best in terms of the secondary characters, and yes, more Mr. Gray, please. So overall, there are definitely some ups and downs to this series as well. I really liked the first 2 books, like I said already, and the last 2 were just okay, which is why I ultimately gave the whole series 3 stars. Also, before I forget, the reason why I didn't give 2 books no stars in the beginning of the video were for the last 2 books because I didn't really know how to rate them individually because I didn't want to rate them that low, but at the same time, I think the overall, to make it like the average 3 stars, I would have to rate them very low, but they didn't seem like they were that bad. It was just overall, it was a 3-star series. So that's why I didn't give any ratings to the last 2 books of the series. Then the next book that I want to discuss is Lovely War by Julie Berry. So this is a book set between World War I and World War II, and it features 2 epic love stories that is being narrated by the Greek goddess Aphrodite. And the reason why Aphrodite is narrating the story is because she was caught cheating on her husband Hephaestus with Ares at the very beginning of the book, and now Hephaestus has this court where he is basically judging Aphrodite and Ares, and Aphrodite is narrating this epic love story to kind of explain to him about certain elements of love and war. So anyways, back to the main love story. So the book features 2 main couples. The first couple is Hazel and James. Hazel is this shy and very talented pianist, and James on the other hand is an inspiring architect, but he is drafted into war. And then the other couple is Colette and Aubrey, and Colette is a war survivor. She is a survivor from the rape of Belgium. And then on the other hand, there is Aubrey, who is a gifted musician, as well as a Black American soldier fighting in Europe. And the 2 couple throughout this book faces so many tragedies dealing with war, prejudice, and just so much more. So overall, I rated this book 4 stars. So I actually really enjoyed the combination of World War I and World War II, along with the narration of all these Greek gods and goddesses. Somehow, those 2 combinations didn't seem like they'll work out very well, but it did, and it was done so well. But the one thing I would have to say is that the author definitely wrote this book with the assumption that the reader went in with some Greek mythology knowledge, because otherwise, you don't really understand the whole relationship between Ares, Hephaestus, and Aphrodite. And for me, it worked out because I love Greek mythology, so I really enjoyed that, and I knew it going in, and I understood some of the nuances and some of the subtle things that she was hinting at. But for some of my book clubs, I read this book as a book club, by the way, some of my book clubbers did not understand it because they don't know anything about Greek mythology, and they're just really confused, and they didn't have any knowledge in terms of the relationship, in terms of why they're having this court, etc. And so the author definitely wrote this book with the assumption that you go in with some sort of knowledge of Greek mythology. Because honestly, the author did not really go too much into detail with the backstory. So definitely needs some sort of Greek mythology background for you to fully understand and appreciate this book. Out of all the characters, I would definitely say my favorite were definitely Hazel and James, but that's because I feel like the author definitely focused on that couple instead of focusing on Colette and Aubrey as well. I feel like they were definitely ignored for some part of the book and just not really focused upon, even though the book clearly stated that they're supposed to follow 2 couples. But there was definitely more of a leaning towards Hazel and James versus Colette and Aubrey, which is actually kind of a shame because Colette's own backstory, as well as the fact that Aubrey is a Black American soldier and a bunch of prejudice just because of that, would have been very interesting in terms of just Hazel and James. So it was kind of a shame that the author mostly focused on Hazel and James versus Colette and Aubrey. But I do think that the author did a fantastic job of portraying how much Ward changes someone, because that was one of the biggest insecurity and fear that Hazel and James faced. Just the fact that Ward changed them during that time period, and were they really the same person that they were when they first met. So overall, I did really enjoy this book, but I'm giving it 4 stars because I think that Colette and Aubrey's story could have definitely been explored a lot more, as well as the fact that there weren't that much backstory involving the Greek gods and goddesses, and that could have definitely been helpful. Then the next book that I want to discuss is Truly Devious by Barreen Johnson. So this book follows true crime buff Stevie, who decides to attend Ellingham Academy, where decades earlier, when the school first opened, the founder's wife and daughter was kidnapped. And the only clue was this letter by someone called Truly Devious. And so Stevie decides to attend the school in the hopes that she will be the one to crack this cold case. But before she knows it, she ends up wrapped in this other murder mystery. So I actually really like this book. I gave it 4 stars. But the funny thing though, and this is like a very unique situation where when I first finished this book, I was like, I loved it, gave it 4 stars. But then when I was actually writing the review, I realized I had like 0 positive things to say about it, but I still really liked the book. I don't know why. I wasn't a huge fan of the romance. I feel like the author added just enough romance to be like, here's some romance, but not enough for it to be fully explored. And honestly, even the male love interest was kind of a hot mess. But at the same time, if the author developed it a little bit more in the second or third book, I would not be mad about it. Another disappointing part was the ending. It wasn't a bad ending per se, but I had just expected it to end a certain way, and it didn't, and it actually ended on a major cliffhanger, so I'm just like But I guess if there was one thing that I would say that I liked about this book would definitely be Stevie. I just found her really quirky and very intelligent. There were definitely a number of times when I found her incredibly odd yet delightful that I couldn't help but bond with her. And okay, fine, I guess there's another aspect that I liked about this book as well, and that was the plot. I guess the mystery and the plot definitely kept me going, but the romance was just not that interesting. The ending was very disappointing because there was a huge cliffhanger, but somehow though, I still really enjoyed this book. The character was okay as well. Like, she was quirky, delightful, but still kind of weird at times. But I definitely think it was mostly because of the mystery element that kept me going and why I ultimately really enjoyed this book. So I definitely cannot wait to pick up the second one as soon as possible. And the last series I want to discuss is the Illuminate Files series by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is a YA sci-fi novel that follows 3 separate couples spanning across 3 different books. Obviously, because it's a trilogy, by the way. And each book picks up where the previous one left off, and it features a new couple. There are deadly plagues, murderous AIs, treachery, betrayal, romance, and just so much more. So in the first book, it follows Ezra and Katie, whose home planet was just destroyed and attacked by this rival company of some sort, and now they're forced to flee the planet. But now that they have escaped from their planet and from that attack, they're now faced with how to survive, because they're in these 3 ships with way too many survivors and refugees, not enough resources, and there's this deadly plague that's happening, as well as this murderous AI. Basically, a lot of shit went down, guys, and I gave the series as a whole 5 stars because this series was just so good. This is also the series where I had listened to the audiobook while reading the ebook at the same time, because I don't know where I heard this or where I saw this, but someone had recommended doing so because it's actually a full cast audio, and so you really get to connect with all the characters because there's literally a different person for each role, and so you really connect with each character. And also being able to see it physically as an ebook or as a physical copy allows you to follow along, and it was just so worthwhile doing this because I don't know what happened. So I actually read The Illuminate, the first book, back in 2016, and I gave it 3 stars. And I went to look at my review because I was curious as to why I gave it 3 stars, because this time around I was like, oh my god, I love the book so much. And the main reason why I gave that book 3 stars was because I couldn't connect with the characters. Well, I can definitely tell you that listening to the audiobook while reading it in front of you physically or digitally definitely solved that problem, because I felt so connected with all the characters and just invested with them all. So like I said, the full cast narration really helped bring all the characters to life. I also really loved how strong the females were, because honestly, Katie and Hannah in the first 2 books, and I just love how they took it upon themselves to figure it out and survive and help save the ship and their families and friends. The one thing that I think could have been improved upon a little bit more was the last book, and that is the last couple for Asha and Reese, because I feel like The last book, they were not really the main characters. They were the main characters, but because it was also told in the perspective of Katie, Hannah, Ezra, Nick, and just a whole host of other characters, that couple just seemed to be more neglected upon, and I feel like I just didn't really connect with them as much as I did with the characters in the first two books. And the format of this series was also incredibly unique because it's comprised of emails, video surveillance footages, transcripts, interviews, etc. And there's also this AI who's speaking as well, and there's also all these comics and these gorgeous depictions of galaxies with some of the words like being looped around in circles and circles, which also is another reason why to pick up the audiobook, because if you were picking it up physically or digitally, you literally have to rotate your book or your Kindle or whatever to read all the words when they're literally in circles and circles. But listening to an audiobook, the narrator does that all for you, so you just have to like sit back and enjoy when the narrator does that. So another reason why you should pick up the audiobook. But anyways, the format of the series definitely helped enhance the story. So overall, if you're looking for a fantastic sci-fi series, then definitely check this one out because this one was so good. So overall, those are all the books that I want to discuss in this video. I actually had a pretty good reading month in terms of my ratings because I had a lot of 4 and 5 star books, which doesn't really happen that often. But anyways, those are all the books I want to mention. Let me know down below if you have read any of the books that I mentioned. If you have, did you like them, did you not like them? If you haven't, are they on your TBR list? Let me know down below. But as always, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe down below, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!